set up, and then we show it to people. In the case of the Sylvari, because we wanted to talk about the iconic characters right off the bat, we basically already presented what we had at the time when we showed the original cape. And now, as you guys have watched us evolve and change and develop and present the Sylvari in a way that we feel comfortable with.
And that hits on one of the touchstones we have from ArenaNet, which is iteration. We put something out there, we let people work with it both internally and externally, and then we refine it, we improve it. This has happened over and over again with the voices, with the look, with the character art, with the skills the NPCs have in the game. Sean, anything to add on execution?
Yeah, the character art that you mentioned with the Sylvari and how that's changed, that's an example of how the lore and the writing development are mixed in with other things, and the storytelling methods at our disposal involve the way that the models actually look. We have to go into the game quite a bit and look at the game world and how these characters are actually walking around and how they look and what they're doing, because that's important for what they're saying too. So make sure
that's something that we've also been a little bit bitten with. One of the most recent voice blog posts by Angel McCoy has a Sylvari and a Norn talking, and in it, one of them implies that Sylvari literally fall out of the tree. And that's not accurate. That's kind of a joke on Sylvari's part. But we weren't sure at the time how we were going to do that. We knew we wanted the tutorial to end with you awakening, you coming out of the tree. But we weren't sure how the artists were going to make the pods because we hadn't designed that yet. So we made the Sylvari make a joke about how it happened so that we didn't have to be too specific, so that now that we have the art, we didn't say something that contradicted it.
Now, I'm going to take the heat off Angel here, is that at one point back in Ghosts of Ascalon, we had a sequence with Kylie, who was the first Sylvari most people met as a result of being in the book. And she was, she literally conned a pair of human guards, and it had mentioned how they tend to believe anything you say when you act like you just fell off the tree.
Yeah.
And of course, it was the case of fell off the tree is like you fell off the back of the truck. So
right.
She got all wide-eyed and innocent, and basically they took her at her word. So she's a Sylvari. Why is she going to lie? She's not, they haven't been around long enough to lie. So.
And that was another challenge we faced in writing the Sylvari. You have that fresh, guileless, but we didn't want them to sound naive or stupid. Like, what is this thing called fire? And they know what fire is. It comes from a tree. They're born with some information about the world.
And actually, that's a part where the dream comes from, too, is the idea that we wanted characters for whom the world was new, but who were functional in that world. And the idea of the dream as a, training animal, as a nursery, it was just like a wonderful opportunity to be able to portray that.
And then just in terms of the big picture, all the other races, the humans, the Norn, the Asura, have all been kicked around pretty much. The humans by the centaurs, the Asura by the dragon, the Norn by Dorme. But the Sylvari are pretty fresh. They haven't had that layer, so they can still approach the world with interest, with enthusiasm, and with a kind of wide-eyed, hey, let's check that out, sort of curiosity as opposed to nothing.
They're good balance that way.
So if she's going, we can easily explore her.
So you want to do something with about the writing nature? We can concentrate on lore and specifics. What about the writing?
Execution-wise,
Yeah.
Working with the Char, at least, it helped us grab a handle on them that they were so military. They're all very focused, they're all very goal-oriented, they're all very victory-oriented. You have a whole race of people like that, it's hard to pick out the one who's being a jerk. They're all kind of aggressive, they're all out for themselves, but they also have this sense of unity and loyalty. Like the Char come first. Our goals are the most important goals, and we are going to conquer.
And they have a warband.
And we show their loyalty to each other through the tight connection of the warband. At a young age, Char leave their parents and are taken to the Farrar, which is basically a boot camp for cubs. Primus trains them from that point forward how to be soldiers, how to work like a unit. And your warband becomes your family from that point on. You're treated as your brothers and sisters, people you do not leave behind, people you do not take lightly, people you take into consideration before you make decisions.
And from a story, this basically starts with Eye of the North, where Tyler Fearshot is going after other members of his warband because they are family. And the strength of that, that link is very important in Eye of the North. And as we went along, we said, well, what does this mean? How do you become a part of the warband? Why is this such an important operation? One person that was very influential was Ben Miller, who who is an incredible fan of Band of Brothers.
Yes.
He was watching
Which is an
Brought
awesome
it-
series.
Watched it
Haven't seen it.
Watched it
War
lunch,
stories.
loaned it to people, etc. So basically the whole question of war stories, and so we have a warrior culture, and how does its war stories, how does its band of brothers and sisters evolve? And that's where we get the war band concept.
And an additional challenge, you want to give these individual characters some kind of personality, some sort of arc of their own to make them interesting. But as part of the military, they are part of a larger unit that has a larger goal. So there's almost this dichotomy where the military suppresses individuality in favor of the group. But in terms of writing, we need interesting characters in the military unit so that the story makes sense and is engaging.
Now, when we talk about the races too, we tended to give them a 3-beat. You know, the Sylvari were go for it then.
No, it's as a preparation tool on our wiki, our internal documentation. Whenever there's a major or even a semi-major character, their wiki page has what we call a 3-beat, which is 3 easily rememberable related things that define that character. I don't have one in front of me.
Well, for the races, for example, for the Sylvari, we talked about them. They were noble, and they were beautiful, and they were plants. And if you go and look at our concept art from our early art books, you can see that as we swing wildly between those 3 poles, we get things that are beautiful, but they don't look particularly noble. They got big anime eyes and everything. We've got things that look, very plant-like, but they don't look particularly beautiful either. They've got, little big rooty type of man thing sort of things. So when we ended up with the Sylvari, there's a nice balance point between the points. Now for individuals, we do a 3-beat as well. Logan. You remember
Logan was noble and
noble, dedicated.
love was in there too.
Yeah, because
In love.
he's very protective, and that was one of where he initially came from.
And it's both a strength and a failure. I mean, a lot of the 3-beats go both ways.
Yes, and that basically gives us a feeling, because often, particularly for like our iconic characters, multiple people are going to write them. It's not all going to be, you are the department of Logan, and everything, and we should see everything as far as continuity all the way through, but over time we evolved what the Char act like, what the Char will talk about, what's important to the Char, what are Char virtues, loyalty is an important virtue, success is an important virtue, resourcefulness is an important virtue. All of these are Char virtues, so when we talk about, we want the Char to either embody those or to react against them. We can have the cowardly Char, but we're not going to see a lot.
Recognizing that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then one of our biggest challenges in terms of execution, we have this excellent lore set down. We have tight and strong story arcs. But in terms of writing voiced dialogue, dialogue that is spoken is written differently than dialogue you read on a page. It's just, when I learned it in school, it's writing for the eye as opposed to writing for the ear. Something that's meant to be said out loud has a different cadence, has a different length. And I think I'd like to throw this over to Sean. We've done a lot of voice recording, and often the lines will change slightly in the recording booth. I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Yeah, so one of the things that comes to mind when you're talking about the Char, you're a great example, I like the Char also. Militaristic is one of the 3 beats, or if not, it's close to it. But so you'll say something like that as part of your lore design, and then us as writers, we take that and then we try to interpret what that means through discussion and then play testing with the Char and how they sound when they're in the game. And one of the things we found with Char is we really needed to get the voice actors to record stuff, get it back into the studio, so we could, get it back from the studio and then implement it so we could hear what it sounded like. And then we could start to write a little bit more specifically for the actors that we had and for how the voices actually ended up sounding when we applied our processing to them. And so, that made a big difference. And militaristic meant that we would have to put certain words in there, and we'd have to have certain things like war cries, and some of the actors didn't quite get that at first, and we had to work with them. And that's one of the challenges.
I remember bivouac being a tough word.
Yeah, and military-specific words too. We try to seed in like bivouac.
And one kind of behind-the-scenes trick we learned, to get the actors to sound more military and more Char. It sounds crazy, but we had to tell them to stick their chins out when they talk. So stick your chin out like this, and suddenly sound more tight and strong. We are in purple. Let's do this now.
One of the lines
Again, sir.
that we give to Asura
Grab a
is,
shave.
if you're ever in doubt as to how the line should say, in your mind say the words idiot after the line. Hi, would you like to buy something? Just say it like that.
And that really made all the difference. Suddenly our Asura sounded much more Asura.
It's to evolve once we get into the recording session. We've got incredibly good voice talent, and they've got, they bring stuff to the table, and we're discovering what works, what doesn't work. As Scott says, short bits work. Short works better than long, because they're basically trying to we're trying to make it sound as natural as possible. A lot of our really good voice talent also does like anime. And anime is very broad and very open and very expressive, and we want to have much more of a conversational, reality-based sort of feel. So basically, dialing it back a notch has been one of the big challenges. Basically, and we have directors who have done who act as our middlemen, and we're in the booth and we say, okay, we want this line. We want him to be scared, but we don't want him to be showing that he's scared, so he's a little nervous, but kind of nonchalant. He goes, yeah, I got it. Okay, just throw the next line away. Just do it natural. And the actor would do it, and it would be perfect. So we were really happy with what we got. One thing that I did get, I will share, the short lines are the worst part for your VO people. Because often they'll just get the line. They won't necessarily, we try to give them the scripts as much as possible, but sometimes they'll get a line that's, oh yeah. And how do they read that? Oh yeah? Oh yeah. Oh yeah! And the one I had problems with, and it's much to my surprise, I've spent 15 years in Wisconsin, was a line for the Norn called "Yeah, hey there." If you've been up north or you've seen Fargo, yeah, hey there. Yeah, how about them Packers? I could not get the actors to do that, including actors who had Scandinavian backgrounds, because they had never heard the Americanized, that nasal sort of, you betcha sort of, yeah. So yeah, hey there disappeared from our arsenal just because we could not, get a regular read on that one word.
There's also the technical challenges we have for making things sound natural. When you're talking about a short line, and sometimes we have to do that because of the animation that has to kind of match. We can't have the line be playing longer than your character is doing something on the screen.
Well, you have like a death line for your death.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Sometimes the death animations go for a while, and sometimes they go very short.
Exactly.
If you're lying on the ground and still delivering your soliloquy.
That's a pretty obvious example. We also run into, for story reasons, we only want to have you in a certain area for a certain amount of time, and if the characters are talking too much, then you're going to miss a lot of that. So all these things we take into account when we're doing the actual writing, the lore, the story.
That's a great segue into something else that we have available for us here in Guild Wars 2 is the large variety of storytelling tools that we have. I did the list before for you. We have our full cinematics, which is what you see when you basically create your Asura or your Sylvari, and it shows you the introduction of your races. I am Char. This is my story. But you have the limited cinematics, which you've seen if you play the demo as well, where two people are talking. Both those are cases where you take your hands off the keyboard and it's running, it's giving you information. But we also have scenes, which are going on at all times. Yep. You're walking down the street in this region, two women are talking about how dreamy Logan is, and you may not hear that. You may go through the entire game without hearing that scene because it's just happening in that one location.
And it only happens occasionally.
It only happens every so often. But it's there to create a sense of color and mood for the world and basically give you the information incidentally that, Logan's a big deal. We have conversation trees. You go up to somebody and you say, I want to have a conversation. You get text, you get options, and you can react differently. So that's a different method. We have items that you can basically toggle into and basically tell you about the story behind a particular, John Stubby littered Divinity's Reach with book stalls. Yep. There are all these book stalls. He has all of these book titles. And we thought how do we do this stuff for the other races as well?
The one that involves no text at all, which is the fly through.
The fly through, yeah.
So at the beginning of the human tutorial, when you fight the boss, the camera kind of zooms over and shows you the entire panoramic landscape.
And in some cases, we use that to show you things, like to tell part of the story. You go over a hill and your character's going to be surprised there's an army, and so you go over the hill and the fly-through starts, and suddenly you see this gigantic army in front of you, and then we've told you something and we've explained how to react without actually having to write it in words.
Now each of these has its own set of rules to it. dealing with Jeff Carmen and Horia and AJ's team. And they're going to produce wonderful stuff and need all sorts of art resources that they basically to sell. Our limited cinematics come out of an engine that was developed by our programming team that allows us to set two people apart from each other. And our animators basically. And what particular expressions they have. So all of these carry different rules. So when you see the entire piece of Guild Wars 2, what you're seeing is a lot of different components that are coming from all different angles at the same time and are all supposed to merge together and give you a common feel for it.
It's a little bit like writing on an obstacle course.
Yeah.
You have to make it so long and so big and so many this, and you can't use that word. You could use this one. It's a little bit general.
And also, I also joke that that writing for a computer game is like writing a book and then having to invent the printing press as you go along. And you're not quite sure if you're going to get question mark technology, but if you get question mark technology, you better put question marks in that manuscript.
I think we have one more topic before we turn it over to questions. I think this is probably the best Nexus Venn diagram overlap with execution of the plot. In terms of the character, I call this voice versus voice. We know that Char are military and speak in clipped tones, but what does each individual Char sound like? So they laid down the foundation for what the Sylvari are like, what the Asura are like, and then in terms of execution, we all have to think of things they say, slang, figure of speech, oaths, cursing. How do we bring these races to life in line with the characters they've been creating?
And I think within that also, you've got the case of, we have a large writing team, and while Jeff and I might focus on some characters like Logan, you've got a guy who's a captain in a village kind of far from his reach, and we might have written a line or two of bio, but there are 3 writers working on that map, and there are 3 different events that use him, and so we have to make sure that he's not mean in one and happy in another and sad, because it wouldn't make sense for the character. We have to keep him consistent.
And that's part of the continuity when we say lore and continuity. We set a foundation for it, but also we act as a continual conduit between the content team that is spawning and creating events and the writing team that is, as I turns it all into English. Basically, so everything goes back and forth between the 2 groups, and we can also come to the decision of, hey, I've got a great idea for a story. Can we do it? And the question is, can we do it from a lore standpoint? Can we do it from a prop standpoint? Do we have the animation for something? We come up with good stories, but it might require us to do custom animation.
And we literally have parts where the personal story needs this character, so we write for it. And then it's also in the main world. If you're not on that story chain, you might still meet it in the world and be able to talk to them. That's different writing. And then it's in the beginning of one of the dungeons because something's happening and it's the person that's representing the Sylvari there. And that's a different writer. And so you have some really widespread people tapping the same character.
There's a lot of back and forth, and we pass a lot of things back to Jeff or back to Reed to check on these characters and make sure that we're staying consistent with the actual words that we're using. And the names too, make sure we're naming them correctly.
Actually, Sean has every so often given me a master list of all of the names of the game. And I'm going through it and I'm looking for repeats. If I've got, Bob over here in Divinity's Reach, and I have Bob and Lion's Arch, if they're not the same Bob, we're probably going to have to change the name.
Or give
Give them the last name. We'll call Farmer Bob. Yeah, call it Captain Bob. We basically, because we want to make sure it's as clear as possible. Now, the cool thing, going through the list most recently, I can go through the list and tell you what the race or species of the individual was by their name. Human names have a very distinctive feel. Norn names have a very distinctive feel. Asura, Sylvari, Dredge, the Highland in particular has a very Aztec, Central American vibe to their names. And so it's very clear to me what we're talking about. And that's a good clue for us because someone may just see the name and then have to do something with it. And knowing if it's a male or female, knowing if it's what race it is,
knowing how it's pronounced
is a way to do it.
Now, those are all very good answers, but what I was shooting for was, what's your favorite racial swear? Juicy thing. Mine would be by Bear's fuzzy backside.